Hey everybody, it's Garyvee, Nerdchuck, episode 308 of the Ask Garyvee show, and I'm super excited about our guest. Just knowing this audience and some of the prior episodes, when this inquiry came in, I kind of jumped on it and said, yes, let's do it right away. Right away in my world. I don't know if that was a couple months ago, but I've been excited about having Iven here. As a matter of fact, just to show you how much, nobody from my admin, no, we had a crazy big business pitch at VaynerMedia, and I got a text from my admins Thursday saying, hey, we need to move the Iven Ask Garyvee show for you to make this pitch. And I never use my content to trump being the operator of my business. Like never. Consistently cancel things. I said, no, I want to keep it because I was scared of when would I be able to reschedule it. So I'm excited for this episode. I hope you are as well. Facebook, YouTube. Are we on Instagram as well? Right here. Instagram, what's up? We are taking phone numbers from YouTube and Facebook. So if you're on YouTube Live and Facebook Live, put in your phone number, and Andy will be taking that. We're not doing the email the question thing. And do you want to do that? You like the phone number thing?
I like the phone number.
Okay. Put your phone numbers on YouTube and Facebook. And without further ado, Iven, why don't you tell the Vayner Nation a little bit about who you are? And a little bit of an origin story. We got into it right before we went on. Maybe where you were born, what kind of kid you were, what you got into, how your career started, all the way up to the fact that you wrote this book, and maybe some of the other stuff we'll bounce on. So a context chapter to start off the show.
Okay. Well, Gary, thank you for having us.
I'm happy.
I appreciate it.
Sure.
So let's see if I can frame this very quickly.
You got time.
No, we can
got
do
time.
this. So I'm the retired CEO of Verizon.
Yes.
I spent my whole career in the phone business.
Yes.
I was a CEO for 16 years, retired in 2011.
What a run.
And when I retired, a lot of people said to me, you know, the industry and the company went through such an extraordinary transformation over the last 20 or 30 years. Why wouldn't you think about writing some sort of a history of the journey of the company? It took me about 4 years to figure out I wanted to do that. But what really helped was I talked to a lot of my colleagues, and we identified 50 different people that we interviewed. And we kind of told the story through the eyes of 50 people.
And I apologize for jumping in, but everybody's laughing right now because I love to jump in, but I'm going to try to be a little more thoughtful. I just think there's a lot of things that are going on that I try to bring out to an audience. Did you take that approach because the reason it even took you 4 years to do it was you thought of writing a book as too self-serving? And then thus the format of using other people's voices felt more comfortable to you as a facilitator?
That's an interesting question. I was more concerned that I would not put my finger on the right issues.
Good for you.
I did not think I could remember all the right points.
That's very fair.
So I would remember what I wanted to remember.
Of course.
So, which, when you write a book, some people will think it's self-serving no matter what you say.
Of course.
But having 50 people
Yeah, I like that.
tell the story. Now, of course, I was able to direct it, ask questions.
Of course.
And then we went to an outside consultant, Ram Sharon, who helped us frame it. And so we now have a story that's through the eyes and the experiences of 50 different people. And the other thing we did is we decided to take all the proceeds from the book and donate it back into the Verizon Foundation to give it to people who have been involved with natural catastrophes like 9/11 or hurricanes and that nature. So I kind of feel like the book is a neutral place.
Yeah.
I have my thumbprint on it, of course, but there's plenty of stories from other people.
Do you, as an individual, I don't know this, I'm asking for myself as much for the audience, are you putting out content in general as a human? Do you write opt-ins? Do you sometimes post on LinkedIn? It's really interesting. I'm a CEO and a personality that is growing up in the era of sharing along the way. You're part of a generation where, it could have gone two very different ways, but have you do you feel like the lessons, now Verizon was public the whole time?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
I assumed. 16 years as an active CEO of a publicly traded company comes with a lot of experiences and a lot of knowledge. This is about the story of Verizon. Do you, at this point in your career, ever feel compelled to randomly write something on LinkedIn or go do a podcast to just talk about what it is to be a leader of people or navigate through turmoil? Does that come natural to you?
Well, the short answer to your question is when I retired, I decided I would not cast any shadow
On your
over our company or the industry. So I have written, other than the book, I've done
Nothing.
no interviews, no conferences, nothing. But I have chosen to have relationships with 20, 30, 40, 50 people that I have kept in touch with. So any personal experiences and advice I can give them, I do privately.
I totally understand.
Right.
And I think that's a classic approach of what is a very well-respected blueprint of somebody who's such a face of an organization. And I'm curious what is going to continue to manifest, because I do think, to your point, I think there's a lot of ways to talk about certain things that are more generic without casting a shadow on the prior company or the individual that takes over that hot seat. I'm just fascinated by it. Nonetheless, let's keep going.
If I can just add
please,
on to what you
please,
said.
please. That's what we're here for.
In my personal experience,
Yes.
before we wrote this book,
Yes.
I must have read 100 biographies of different CEOs.
Yes.
And what I concluded was, no matter how well they try to hide it, somebody had an axe to grind or a story to tell. I didn't feel I had any unfinished business. When I retired, I was ready to retire. The company was ready to see me go, and I was very comfortable with it. And I was ready to get on to the next chapter of my life. And so I didn't feel that I needed to keep a finger in the industry.
Well, now you're starting. This is going to be a fun day. So this gets me into a very interesting thing. I have been asking myself why so I grew up in the wine business. I had this wine store. I did this wine show on the internet. And then when I started building this company, I wasn't producing content. There's this huge gap of me on the internet where I'm making content every day from 2006 to 2011. And then for 4 years, there's very little content of me. And then in 2015, I picked it back up, 14, 15. And recently, I've come to realize that I think positivity needs to be louder. It's very interesting what you just said. It's a very astute observation. I think you're right. And what's interesting and what's manifesting with me currently, this is actively happening with me, is I almost feel an enormous sense of responsibility that as somebody who's positive and optimistic, yet practical and not delusional or entitled, I want to put out content because the people that are putting out the most content on the internet are the disenfranchised, the axes to grind, the negativity. And I'm fascinated by what you had to just say, because I believe that is the approach that many take. And I'm starting to wonder if, I think it's a pleasant thing to read a book from an executive who had an incredible 16-year run, who has no agenda, who's just telling stories, self-deprecating, pounds a little chest, whatever it may be. And I wonder, and one thing that I've been telling my audience is like, look, if you're happy, I think there needs to be some level of consciousness right now of maybe sharing that, because the negativity is very loud. And positivity tends to be a little bit more passive, and I'm fascinated by that. And that was another version of it. Please.
So two responses to what you said.
Please.
So the first thing is, almost any CEO wants to leave the business in better shape than they found it.
No question.
And the one measure of making sure that that works is the institution you left controls its own destiny and continues to do all the things it needs to do to be sustainable. So if you have somebody who's constantly looking back to draw the past to the future, that's not very helpful.
I respect that.
So people have to continually reinvent the
I
future
agree.
going forward. Now, just to show that I am human, when I left, what I learned really quickly is the projects I got involved with, there was a tremendous curiosity of transferring my skills, having worked in the phone business for 46 years, and transfer them to other things. And so while everything I've done since I retired is neither as important or as big as I did when I worked at Verizon, almost everything I do is very important to the people I work with.
No question.
So I serve on the board of a hospital. I serve on the board of the Genome Center here in New York. I'm working with 3 or 4 startup companies. I do some consulting with an investment banking firm.
Good for you.
And all those activities draw upon my experience.
No question.
And there's a lot of fun. You have a lot of fun doing that stuff.
So let's go way back.
Okay.
So you're a kid growing up where?
Well, I'm a Bronxite. I grew up in the Bronx. Okay.
Are you a big Yankee fan?
It's very interesting.
Oh,
the
this is
question
gonna
is,
get
am
good.
I a Yankee fan? So
A man
sure.
of your generation from the Bronx,
So-
not being a total diehard Yankee fan is going to have a good story. So I'm excited right now.
So I was a Yankee fan.
Okay.
And I liked the Yankees.
Okay.
However,
Keep going.
in high school, we played baseball against N. Claypool. And Claypool became a Met. And then the Yankees fired Yogi.
Yes, they did.
And once they fired Yogi, I was no longer a Yankee fan.
So you were such a big Yankee fan.
Well, how could you not be a Yankee fan when you're 8 years old?
I apologize.
Right,
I said the wrong thing. You were such a big Yogi fan that the firing of Yogi...
I hated the way the Yankees treated Yogi when they fired him.
I get it.
And then I needed an excuse to root for the Mets anyway.
Right.
So, and I've been a Met fan ever since.
I love it.
And I am, today, one of the small minority owners of the Mets.
Oh, okay,
So
you did
that's
that
even
thing
more
yet?
fun.
That's even
It's
more
even
fun.
more
You know
fun.
what's really funny about this? This is something that maybe people don't know. I grew up a big Yankee fan in Jersey, which you had split. I was a Jets Yankee guy, so it was like, you had different kind of allegiances. Right. But the Yankees won in 96, and that was it. When the Rangers won in 94, and when the Yankees won in 96, I stopped rooting for my favorite team. Like, literally just winning a championship has been the finishing point to the journey. And I'm actually raising my son a Mets fan because his cousins are Met fans. And so we're going to go through a very similar thing because I'm going to get sucked in at some point.
I like both teams, but I'm a Met fan.
Yeah, I get it.
And when the Yankees play the Mets, I root for the Mets.
I understand.
Right.
You're a Mets
Yeah,
fan.
Absolutely.
What about football, Giants?
Jets.
Jets!
Jets.
This is very good. All right.
Jets.
My complete energy has changed. Okay. So go ahead, please.
Actually, if you think about it, growing up in New York in the 60s, I wasn't corporate.
I get it.
So like the Jets, like the Mets, you get that. Right.
I get it.
Right.
What year did you switch to the Mets? Do you know?
Well, the first year.
Right away.
The Yankees fired Yogi in 64, I believe.
Okay.
Right? And the Mets were in 62. So I started right there around 62.
And when the Mets made Yogi manager, you were pumped.
I loved it.
You must have loved that.
And as a kid, I was a Willie Mays fan.
How old were you in 69 when the Jets and Mets won?
I was born in 46.
Oh, so you were perfect.
Yeah.
You were like in a beautiful age.
Right.
So you really got it.
Oh, yeah, no. My generation, New York sports,
Knicks.
the Dodgers and Giants were in New York in the 50s, so it was great. New York was full of great sports.
I love it. All right, so you grow up in the Bronx. What kind of kid are you? Entrepreneur, student? Like, what kind of dude were you?
A dopey kid.
Okay.
A dopey kid.
That's a great answer.
Right, no,
No,
it's
go-
a
I mean, listen,
dopey
that's
kid.
the answer.
You know, I lollygagged through school.
It didn't challenge you?
You know, I wouldn't say that. I think that schools I went to were good schools. They challenged you, but I was a dopey kid. I didn't pay attention. And I ended up going to Lehman College. At the time it was Hunter College, and went for 1 year. It's in the book. They threw me out after a year. I didn't have good grades. And I got a job working for the phone company. Luckily, actually,
This is my high school report card.
Yeah.
No matter how dopey you are, you're going to have to really, really work at challenging that beauty.
I would challenge you with my.
Do you have it?
I probably have it someplace.
I need to see that evidence. Go ahead.
But so anyway, I went to college.
Yep.
I got a job during the day working a freight elevator in Manhattan. Then I got drafted because I was 1A.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, I worked for the phone company for 1 month when I got drafted. And I served in the service for 24 months. And the thing about the phone company is they used to write me letters and send me information. They treated me like I still belonged to them, even though I only worked for them for a month.
Wow.
And so...
What company?
It was New York Telephone.
New York Telephone.
And then when I came out of the Army, I went back to work for the telephone company and went back to night school and finished night school 12 years later. The phone company was always a great place for me because they took care of me. And they helped me grow up. So I went from dopey kid to...
Not as dopey.
To an Army veteran. You learn a lot of stuff in the Army. And then, then you work in a big institution. You learn a little discipline. And then I met my wife when I got out of the service, and she gave me more discipline. Okay, and then you build a career, and then, one thing leads to the other.
And let's spend a few minutes on one thing leads to the other. New York Phone Company until when?
Sorry?
You were in the New York Phone Company until when?
Oh, no, I was, if you look at it the way you asked the question, I started in the New York Telephone Company in 1966 and was part of the system
all the way
until
through.
I retired in 2011.
That's what I'm looking for. The consolidation, the breaking out, the mergers, the M&As. How did it all go down?
Well, I started in New York Telephone Company. I went to AT&T. I worked a little bit at Bell Laboratories. When the AT&T was broken up back in the early 80s, I went with the New York regional company. And then they moved me to Washington, and I lived in Washington. And then we started consolidating the companies, and then we bought cellular companies, and we started reconstructing the industry. And, I was one of the people that, over the years, that had a lot of experience in working at different parts of the system. So probably my contribution to Verizon probably was to help reconstruct the industry. After the government broke it up, we spent the next 25 years recreating a different industry, but one that had scale and scope and focused on wireless and focused on broadband and all the things you guys like.
Can we focus a little bit on the breakup?
Yeah, sure.
How long was that in the air before it actually went down? How long was it in the public consciousness or behind the scenes or in the press with that, hey, this thing is actually going to get broken up?
So it's a good question because it has relevance to what's going on today with the tech companies.
That's why I'm asking.
Right.
History. By the way, in that crappy report card, the only good grades I had are history. Besides gym, I was a gym class hero. 4 A's. They're the only A's on my report card. But I asked that question, and you're very astute. It's self-serving. I do think history is an enormous indicator to the future, and I haven't had the opportunity to really dig in, and so I'm taking my at-bat right now. I'm curious.
So in a nutshell, if you looked at the old Bell system, the old AT&T in the 70s, there were two complaints that just wouldn't go away. The first is they were stifling new entrants from coming into the market. So they were a big monopoly, and no matter how many companies wanted to get into the phone business, even though the technology was there for it to happen, it never really blossomed. And the second thing is the government itself kind of gave up and said, they're too big to regulate. We can't figure it out. And so, to your question, that was going on for probably 5 to 10 years before that, but it never got traction. But then it started to get traction.
Why? From your one man's point of view.
Well, okay. The government was getting more serious about it, and they were suing the company all the time, and they were getting extremely aggressive about trying to correct those things that they thought were a problem, which is barriers to entry, and they couldn't regulate it. But the other thing that happened is the company itself lost the ability to grow. So once AT&T itself said, look, I can't deal with all this government interference and regulation, and I'm having trouble growing myself, that's when they got together and they agreed on a consent decree that broke up the company. So if you look at today, some of the tech companies, not all of them, but some of them, they look too big to regulate. They've become global. They have no allegiance nor a grounding in any country. They operate to a different set of standards. And people are getting frustrated that simple things that should be governable aren't. Now, they haven't run into the problem of no growth.
That's right.
So, but they will. At some point, growth will slow, and there will be forces in which governments around the world and the companies will come to the conclusion there's another paradigm that's necessary here.
I understand.
Right? So these things run in cycles. Now, I tend to be more market-based, so I'm not looking for government-mandated solutions. I think the tech companies deserve a lot of credit for what they've built, but they have run into a situation in which not all of them are serving customers the way they should.
Yeah, I understand.
And so therefore, I think these things will come to a head over the course of the next 4 or 5 years.
I think the thing that's interesting to me in the current state of the tech companies versus the AT&T parallel is there weren't alternatives to use a different phone provider. The alternatives were super difficult. Like your ability to not use Facebook or Google is quite high. Like my ability to use Yahoo or Bing as a search engine or not be on Facebook or Instagram is extraordinarily high. I think one of the most fascinating things that are happening right now in the current conversation of tech companies is the shocking inability for Americans to take any level of accountability on themselves.
Well, so this is interesting. So if you go to history, which say, people used to make that argument about Coca-Cola. they're the cause of obesity. Well, people would make that case against the phone company by saying, we're teaching kids to sit on the phone.
Say that one more time, because I'm really excited what you just said. I want to get back to Coke.
I'm not advocating
No,
that
I know
position,
you're not.
But as a business person.
No, I love what you just said. The amount of parents right now that are too young to remember an era when the phone company was blamed for kids being on the phone all day. I mean, they're just doing the same thing. Like, I watch parents yet complain about the iPad, and I'm like, take the iPad away from your kid. They're as if the iPad, as if Apple controls them.
No, but as a business,
yeah, I'm listening.
We had to be sensitive to,
of course,
these kinds of arguments.
Of course.
We had to balance making money against doing the right thing.
Of course.
But you have to pay attention to these things over the course of your history, because the public will hold you accountable.
Of course.
Right.
But where's the public's accountability? I mean, to me, that is the great, fascinating thing about this. You know, maybe I'm hypersensitive to this because I was born in the Soviet Union. But, you know, I commend Apple debating should they make apps that stop you from screen time. It's all very wonderful. Coca-Cola has Diet Coke. There is zero sugar Coca-Cola. Where does it stop and start? Mike Bloomberg in this great city tried to limit how big a soda is and got the reaction in the other way.
Yeah.
I think what's fascinating is watching people. I'm fascinated by 70 or 80 years of prosperity. Listen, you're a man from a different generation than a lot of like the people that I'm referring to right now who, you know, I believe that we've had so much prosperity in this country that, you know, we've gotten quite, I'm just fascinated by lack of accountability. I really am.
Well, so this is a political discussion, so I'm not going to go
there. Yeah,
there,
and honestly, you'll appreciate this. I am not actually, to your point, I'm not really interested in the political.
But as a business discussion.
To me, it's a business discussion.
Yeah, so I agree with almost everything you said. But there is an issue that we have looked at the last 30 years, and we have created more inequality than we intended to create. So we have overdosed on technology. We've overdosed on displacing people with technology.
You're preaching, but
so we have to figure that out.
I'm with you. And to your point, not to make this a political conversation, here's the problem. Our overdosing on technology hasn't even begun. There's a naivete, right? I mean, this second is the least amount of technology involvement in perpetuity.
Correct.
So we need to accept that, because ideology is super fun. But making your kids spend an hour less on the iPad is not going to solve a lot of these human truths.
Right. So if we look at, I'll use our business.
And I apologize real quick to cutting you off. I think to segue a little bit, because I think it's going to bring value to the audience, what I love about the conversation we're having is these are the macro trends that a CEO, where she and he has to be thinking about on an everyday basis, of the micro, like these things we're talking about in the world is how you thought about the four walls, the virtual four walls of Verizon for 16 years. Everything's important at all times. The amount of things that happen here, the point you were making about Coca-Cola and
I wasn't picking on them, but
no, you weren't. You were actually doing exactly right. I spend every day about perception becomes reality, becomes what you have to deal with.
Yeah. So if I can bring this fast forward.
Please.
So one of the things our industry always had a lot of pride in. So when we moved from first generation wireless to third, now to fifth generation wireless 5G, what we hope will happen is that industries that have been untouched by technology will be disrupted and transformed.
Well, especially 5G. I don't know.
So let's take an example.
People do not understand the technology jump that this is about to be.
So let me use my favorite example. Banking has been changed, right? Retail is being changed. If you go into a classroom, it looks the same as it did 40 years ago. And so when I look at education, where is the technological disruption that should have occurred in that over the last 30 or 40 years? So we need to see that happen. Healthcare is another place. The environment's a third. So to me, the business community has lots to give, but there's an uneven focus around where technology gets deployed. And some of that is inertia, some of that is government, some of that is entrenched, interests. But the fact is, we need to take the technological revolution and apply it aggressively across industries. So we need, Amazon did what it did. We need an Amazon of education. We need an Amazon of environment to really apply the technology. And that would create jobs, and it would create value, and it would start to slant. What we're now looking at is all this inequality of jobs and educational skills.
I understand. Let's take this in a different turn. What about, in your career, who were your biggest mentors, and what were some of the best pieces of advice you got from them?
So early in my career, I was probably uncoachable.
Because you thought you were right about
no,
everything?
because I'm a city kid. You figure you can figure everything out yourself.
Right.
But what I think, the way I would answer your question,
That's fully how I believe it.
Yeah, no, I could see that.
Yeah,
I could see that. What I did though is I used to copy the people who did things I liked, and so I used to like the way they dressed, or somebody else in a meeting would handle bad news very well, or somebody would have a positive attitude. And so I used to use, my mentors were those people who had attributes that I thought were pretty cool.
Well, I actually analyzed that as a street kid.
Yeah.
You're using your environment to make adjustments.
That's true. And I learned as I moved up in the company, people watched everything I did.
100%.
And so to me, imitation is the best form of teaching that you can give people if you do the right thing, or if you try to do the right thing.
And it's an incredible sense of responsibility once you make that realization.
Right. So to answer your question, my mentors were the people who handled controversy well, who had a good attitude, who were always prepared.
How much do you think positivity matters? I mean that. Practical positivity. When I say something like that, how does that register in your mind?
So remember now, I'm an East Coast kid.
Yes.
So when I hear that term, I want to make sure I ferret out the fluff.
Go ahead.
So I like people with a positive attitude, but I like people who are practical, street smart, and get things done.
Yep.
Not people who like to yak it to 20,000 feet. And
You
just
mean pontificating positivity?
That's a word.
That's how you notice how I framed it up, right? I think positivity is imperative, but if it lacks practicality, it's an ideology.
Right. So,
and it's vulnerable.
Yeah. Now, so there was one person who once gave me some advice that's close to this point, Gary, and that is, we were in a meeting, and a very contentious subject. And as typical in a meeting on the East Coast, when people get upset with each other, they attack each other personally.
Yes.
And so my boss, who was from Michigan, just on the way back to our office, he took me aside and he said, "Ivan, why do people around here attack each other and not the problem?" And he was sending me a message. Mm-hmm. Don't do that. I never forgot it. And here
awesome.
I am 40 years later, and I've never forgotten it. And I sit in a room, and I could tell the people who get frustrated with the facts or the issue or can't articulate their point of view, and the first thing they do is attack somebody instead of attacking the problem.
I like that, Ivan.
And it's just something, so that's an example.
I'm a buyer of that.
So
I'm an East
that's
Coast
positivity.
kid, but I always say that I'm unemotional, and what I'm really saying is what you just said, which is the biggest thing I preach to my direct reports is that if you're not capable of being the bigger person in every situation, then you're vulnerable with me, because to your Michigan boss's point, it's just, there's no value in that behavior. And once in a while, I love when you have such a good rapport when you can do it, and it's almost like you're competing on the basketball court. But to your point, that's cool. I love that. That's a great story.
So
Please,
if I could bring us
you
back
can do
to the
anything
book,
you want, of course.
I could bring us back to the book. So there are lots of chapters in there, but it's a couple of favorite chapters
Please.
I have. And one of them is the story of how our company was able to deliver after 9/11.
Let's talk about it.
So very quickly, 9/11 occurred. All
Right here.
We were one of the first people that were called by the Department of Homeland Security, because they said, "You guys must know what's going on. What's going on?" And we said, "We don't know what's going on." We saw the second plane hit the tower. Within 10 minutes,
When you say you saw,
we were sitting in our office at the 42nd Street building, looking down. We saw the first tower on flames, and we saw the plane hit the second building.
you physically saw from your office window.
About 30 of us.
I'm listening.
Our chief engineer said, right there,
On that second.
He said, they don't put that fire out, that building is going to collapse.
And you guys were like, what the hell are you talking about?
And we told other people that. Now, we didn't know if that was right, but he was right.
He sure
And
was.
he said, and we said to him, Larry, why is that right? He said, because all the steel's going to melt in the center of the building and it's going to collapse.
Wow.
Okay? So our job then, because all of Wall Street was out,
Yep.
all of lower Manhattan was out. And what happened after that was the next morning, still flames, still trying to look for survivors. The calls were coming in from all over the country about when is the stock exchange going to be up and running? And every single one of the trading partners in Wall Street said, yeah, we'll be up Thursday. And we knew that wasn't true.
Why did you know that to not
Because
be true?
they couldn't get their people into the buildings.
Right.
Right. They didn't have alternative locations. So I remember Dick Grasso, who was the chairman of the stock exchange at the time, he called a meeting, everybody in the city, and he brought our people in, and he said, so what are we going to do? Okay, and our guys just sat there and said, there's no way that you're going to be able to,
No problem.
get the stock exchange up and running because people won't have facilities. And besides, they weren't even letting people into Ground Zero at the time, right? And
Of course.
anybody who wanted to set up facilities in New Jersey or someplace else needed time to do it. So what was interesting is our people basically said, we could do the following, but here's all the things you will have to do. And it was very interesting how Grasso just gravitated to our chief guy, Larry Babbio, and said, so what do you need to do? And so we talked about what everybody needed to do. And the story here was great because we were running cables out of buildings. We were doing all sorts of things that we needed to do, but we were also helping other people do their jobs. So this is the lesson on 9/11 for us, accountability. There is no such thing as accountability if you do your job and the next guy can't do his. Accountability means we all win together. And so we ended up committing to getting the stock exchange up and running the following Monday. And in the process of doing that, we developed relationships with the top 60 or 70 trading partners, the Goldman Sachs, the Merrill Lynch's, all those companies, to help them make sure they can open their facilities, they had enough circuits to get things done, they had the generators and the power and everything else that needed to occur to get the country up and running. And it was one of the greatest experiences of our careers because it was a big deal.
For sure.
It was a big deal. But it taught our company back in 2001 what real accountability is. And real accountability is not just doing your job, but it's doing your job and helping the people you work with do their jobs.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I have such a large audience of 20, 30, 40-year-old entrepreneurs or number twos and threes in smaller companies, quite a bit because of the nature of my business, senior executives in Fortune 500s. What are some of the, just back to the context of this conversation, what are some of the things back to those 20 or 30 people that you spend time with, startups, boards, I'm sure family and friends, what are some of the triedest and truest things that come to mind that bring value? What is some of the advice or thoughts that you've seen bring actual value to others in their careers or ambitions that you feel are like, I don't want to call them your Bill of Rights or your commandments, but yes, that kind of stuff. What are some of the truest things that you believe in as an operator, as an executive?
Probably the thing that comes to mind first, Gary,
Please.
is curiosity and the willingness to ask questions.
Having the humility to know that you don't know everything.
Well, to help people think through things.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it's hard when you get to such a senior level as you sat on to show that, was it hard for you to develop the ability to manifest curiosity into what is humility of a leader, or was that something that came natural to you?
No, I think in my case, I always came with the attitude that I came from the Bronx. So I don't think it ever dawned on me that I had the right to act like I graduated MIT or...
I understand.
I just didn't do that.
Right.
So I was worried about making a mistake.
That's right.
So in my case, I think asking a lot of questions, being prepared, taking the next step.
You brought up being prepared a couple of times. It's not something I think a lot about. I think I stay in my lane, and so thus by macro, I'm prepared. You've brought it up 3 times now. Talk to me about that for 5 seconds.
I don't think I've ever seen a presentation brought to me that there weren't 3 good questions that you couldn't ask. Not to catch people, but just to dig deeper, understand the secondary and the tertiary effects of things. So I think it's really important to be prepared. And I'll just give you one anecdote that's in the book.
Please.
So it probably helped me make my career, even though it was a freak thing.
I'm excited already.
So it was.
Seriously, I love this
It was
stuff.
in 1981.
Okay.
And somehow I was on some sort of a task force, and I was supposed to make a presentation to all of the high-level people at AT&T, including Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown was the chairman and CEO of the company, and I was sort of a mid-level person.
Not the one with Snoopy.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
And Charlie Brown was a legendary guy.
Yeah, big time.
So he shows up.
Have you interacted with Charlie at this point?
Never met him
So are you
before.
scared crapless? Or you felt prepared?
I was prepared.
Okay, keep
And
going.
I'll tell you why I was prepared.
I can't wait.
So
I know there's a punchline
there
coming.
had to be 50 people in the room, all
Yep.
these vice presidents.
Yep.
And the meeting was 8 o'clock in the morning. I got there at 6:30 to make sure everything worked.
Nice.
And he
What was the technology of the day at 81 of working?
There was overhead overhead graphs. You had to make them. And so he walks in at 1 minute to 8, and he sits down, no chit chat. He says, "Proceed." Dead silence, and
Yep.
everybody's sitting there with their arms folded, nobody's smiling, everything else. So
Not the warmest room of all time.
Yeah, no, it was okay. So I started the presentation, and he goes, "I know that." Okay, put up the second chart. He goes, "I know that." Third chart. He goes, "I know that." And I said, "No, you don't."
Really?
Yeah, and I didn't mean it as to be
It just came
disrespectful.
natural.
Right. I just said, "I know you don't know this." And he, dead silence in the room. He looks at me and he goes, "Okay, proceed." So he showed me something. Right? He didn't get upset. He just tested it, and then we talked it through. Now, the gist of the whole presentation was, even though AT&T signed this consent decree with the government, and they were going to break up the system, my point to them was the government wasn't going to cooperate with making this happen easily. So we were going to have to do some things on our own. And I remember his lawyers and all his vice presidents were going nuts. And he just sat there. He just sat there. And at the end of the presentation, he goes, "Thank you very much." He got up and left. Okay, that's what he did. And of course, everybody came up to me and said, "You're screwed. Like, you might as well quit now." And I remember nothing happened for about a week. And then I got a call from my vice president, who was a very big person. He says, "Come into the office." And he brought in all the naysayers. And he said, "Now, before everybody starts screaming," he goes, and I had a beard at the time, full beard, okay, full beard. Nobody had a beard at AT&T. And Walter Kelly was his name. And he said to everybody in the room, he said, "We have 4 sons, and they all have facial hair." And this was in 1980, right? And he goes, "We can't get them to shave." He goes, "What is it with you young people?"
You were 45, though.
Yeah,
right?
Well, no, I was in almost 1980.
Well, because you were born in 46, you said?
66.
Oh, 66.
Right. 66.
Oh,
no,
so you're
46. I was
46.
born in 46.
So you're 44, 45, actually.
Well, no.
Right, this is 81, you said.
81, yeah, right. Let's do the math, right?
Yeah.
86, I was 40, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right.
Right.
My math is
that
off.
correct?
Go ahead. Keep
So I was
going.
do I have
Yep.
the math right?
Yeah, you got the math right. I got it wrong.
Okay, right.
Go ahead.
I wouldn't want my shareholders
No,
to think
my
I couldn't
math
read
is
it.
off.
Okay.
I apologize. Go
So
ahead.
anyway, he said, "What is it with the young people?" And we just laughed. And then he said to everybody in the room, "Listen to the young man." That's just what he said. Now, this was like a high-level person at AT&T. You would never think he would have that kind of flexibility and humility.
Yep.
But he did. So it's a lesson.
Winning player.
A lesson I never forgot.
I believe in it the most. Like
Never forgot it.
nothing makes me happier than being wrong.
But
I
if
always
wa-
think I'm right.
But Gary, if I wasn't
Please.
prepared and didn't have the self-confidence,
You would have never said it.
I would have never
I
said
totally
it.
get it, brother.
I would have just moved
my
into
man,
the
my
conversation.
man, honestly, as somebody who's always thinks there's a second game in the room, this is basically how I live my life. The amount I know about executives that work for me, clients, co-founders, fancy people in the world that people think are brilliant, the amount of things I know by asking a singular question in a meeting, the amount of times I've made up something to see if that person just agrees to appease the, like, It's the most important. You have to get it. When you are sitting in a world where you walk in 1 minute before a meeting and you've got to like navigate that much and time is your biggest enemy,
Right.
you have to create all these secondary skill sets to be able to understand the situation at hand. I have an incredible read on humans based on moments like that.
So coming back to Verizon Untethered, so we believed as a culture, we were as curious as any culture could ever be. So the head of my wireless company or the head of some of the units, when they knew I was traveling around the country for whatever reason, they would give me a list of stores to go into and say, go make a field visit. And I used to do that. And we all used to do that. And we would just go.
Did the stores know you were coming?
No.
Because one of the things I hated growing up in the liquor business is my dad had a big liquor store, and when the Smirnoffs or the Absolut or the Budweiser big dogs would come, we would stage the store. And I remember when I finally was 16 and had some level of a voice, which I really didn't even at 16, but I'd been working in the store for a couple of years at that point. I said, Dad, we're not doing that person a service. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And I go, I remember when I took over operations at 22, I never staged the store. And the distributor would be pissed. The regional managers, the holding companies would be pissed. And the CEO, 8 out of 10 times, was thrilled. It was the only truth they got.
But
I go, nobody's drinking your vodka. It sucks.
But there's an anecdote in here that my successor, Lowell McAdam, he used to also make field visits. He'd go into a store. If there was a light bulb out, he would unscrew the light bulb out, and he would mail it to the district manager.
I get it.
And you do that across a company consistently for 3, 4, 5 years. People pay attention.
100,000%.
Yeah, and it's a big thing. So curiosity is one thing. The other thing
Let's
is
get a phone call in here.
yeah. The other thing is
I'm having too
operational
much fun. Go ahead.
excellence. We were sticklers for that. Now, you're always trying to figure out if you're doing the right thing for your customers.
Yes.
But we really worked hard at that.
You guys built a crazy company.
We did.
You really did.
A lot of people did.
Who were your core competitors when you guys kind of like,
Well, of
when
course.
in your prime of your career, when you kind of took on,
Well,
what was the
AT&T
Yep.
and Sprint
Yep.
and T-Mobile were there, and and later on the
Who's
broadband
disappeared?
side.
Who's
Enjoy this
disappeared?
Verizon ringback tone while your party
who
is reached.
disappeared? Who was a competitor when you first started that is no longer out there? Anybody
Hello?
stand out? Oh, we got somebody? I apologize. Who's this? Robert. It's Gary Vaynerchuk. You're on with Ivan. Please say hello.
Hey, Garyvee. Awesome. You guys are amazing. I love your show.
Thank you. What's your question?
Basically, I actually am a current member of Verizon Wireless, and the whole thing with 5G and our stock in telecommunications, I mean, what's our future going to look like? Or even for small businesses, is that going to help make everything grow with small business and 5G it's going to bring, in your opinion?
Ivan, as somebody who's just very like kind of headline reading at this point and started digging in, but I've dug in because there are some clear things that I'm interested in with 5G. Maybe based on that question, for everybody who's listening, and I don't know how much or how little you've gone deep into 5G, but if you have gone a little bit deeper, which I'm going to make assumptions, but not necessarily based on where you are at this point, what are some of the what are some of the real bullet points that you think people are either missing or the most exciting things to you about this technology?
Right. So let me make sure I qualify by saying that I no longer speak for the company.
I know that.
But I love the company.
Understood.
Okay. And thank you for your call. And Verizon Wireless, you guys are doing great. So keep it up. So
Thank you very much.
So 5G. So what's different about 5G?
Yes.
So a couple of things. So first of all, the number of the devices.
Rob, thanks for calling, brother.
The number of devices you could connect in a 1 square mile is an order of magnitude higher than it is today. So you could create services in which you have millions of the devices in a very small geographic area. They use less power. So you can do the same thing with far less power. The latency, the speed of switching calls, much lower.
That seems to be a really exciting
that's a
part.
huge
The latency
issue.
thing seems to be
And then
a big play.
And then the amount of data that you can transmit is an order of magnitude like tenfold. And the other thing is the cost to transmit the data is much lower. So when you look at
I think the name itself confuses the end consumer because it's one tick up, yet the magnitude is so extraordinary.
Yeah, and that's the same thing happened when we went from 3
And doesn't
to
mean
4G.
that's right. But with 3 to 4G, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems, especially on latency, which I think affects a lot of things, it seems like the jump here is kind of like a signature jump. I just think a lot of people assume my stuff's going to be faster, And there's just so much more to it.
So let's use examples.
Please.
I mean, you've heard these examples before. So we'll take the easy one, self-driving cars. Okay?
This is a big one for me.
So, whether you like it or not, the fact is, over time, when you can reduce the latency and increase the topography and the maps, you eliminate a lot of problems, and you could actually run cities. So Verizon today is introducing smart cities in Sacramento and Portland, and traffic lights. They can do, that's one thing. So something more exotic. Think of healthcare. With broadband, you could do an operation with a patient sitting in Auburn University, and the doctor could be in San Francisco.
Because of the lack of the latency, right?
Because of the speed of the connection.
It's in real time.
And the clarity in real time. And just think of what you can do for example, health services to rural America, or health services into poor areas, or
That's
people
right.
who can't travel, that kind of thing. Just think what you can, kind of services you can offer to the elderly, the latchkey. So that's not our thing in the phone company. I mean, we do the infrastructure.
That's right, you're the pipes.
We put the network in.
Yep.
And I always get uncomfortable that we have to explain what the applications are. When
Right,
in
because
fact
the market needs to take over.
Yeah, the market will
Yeah.
catch up to it, and it'll do it. The market will create it.
But the infrastructure network and pipes, in essence, allow for so many more innovations.
Well, just think of like what you're reading now, which, again, you could like it or not, but all of a sudden the gambling industry has figured this out. And just think of what they're going to do with...
You can literally bet on this pitch.
Right.
Because the speed in which it's happening now is not vulnerable to the connection.
And you could be sitting in Miami betting on a game in Chicago.
That's right.
Okay, well, you
but
couldn't
literally
do that
this
before.
pitch.
Right.
Because, I mean, it really does matter.
Yes. Now, that may not be the perfect use of 5G, but there may be other things.
But
that
look,
people
somebody
can...
getting escapism because they love betting on every pitch of baseball, back to, you said something very important, which is the big things you were doing at Verizon. Well, for the 3-person startup in Cincinnati that you're helping, their problems are the biggest problems to them in the world.
Yep.
To the person who literally got shot and is in a hospital and can be helped by somebody who understands this situation better than anybody there and can electronically do it from somewhere away, guess what? Staying alive is the biggest thing in the world. But the person sitting in their living room who's not happy with their life and needs escapism and needs to gamble on a baseball game to be able to get through their day, that's their most important thing at their life. And I think that's just humans.
Yeah, I'll use
Please.
my favorite whipping toy here. So you think about it. I grew up in an era where you had to go to a sports event. Go to the stadium. You participate in sports, right? Now it's virtual. You go watch any soccer game, anytime you want. So the one industry that's never changed its model is education.
Yeah.
It just drives me crazy. It absolutely drives me crazy that we could be teaching people so much quicker if we applied all this technology in a way
What about
that
the
allowed,
fact that we
right.
continue to teach people to memorize information when information is at your fingertip?
Yeah, well,
How about the curriculum that fills the format? It's absurd
yeah.
what we're doing with that.
Well, your audience understands this, so.
Well, but it takes.
But there's hope. There's
a-
really a lot of hope.
Well, there's also, it's also on us. This goes back to accountability. If parents continue to think a diploma from a college is the KPI and is going to set their kids up for happiness and success, we will continue to be vulnerable. I think it's funny. I think that television commercials are grossly overpriced media. And I've been advocating that as an ad man of the new version for the last decade. I just thought that biggest brands in the world would become more educated over time and know how to spend their money more wisely. I did not anticipate OTT networks like Hulu and Amazon Prime and Netflix to completely eliminate over time people even consuming the content of the big 3 networks, let alone the commercials. I feel like that's what's going to happen with education. This is not going to be the education system figuring itself out because there's too many inherent interests, needs, and putting history on a pedestal. This is something coming from the outside, disrupting it at a level that it has no choice.
Yeah, well, there isn't enough competition in education.
The
that's
end.
That's part of the problem.
The end.
Yeah.
The cab industry wasn't going to make it better for us so that we could get a phone to pick me up in 2 seconds because time is valuable to me. It took an outside force, and then everybody kicks in.
For many years, one of the troubles one of the challenges we had is kids coming out of either high school or college didn't have the minimum requirements to do the jobs that we had.
I get it.
So we would have to spend
From an engineering standpoint?
well, not those jobs, but customer-facing jobs,
I see.
technicians' jobs.
I
So
see.
we spent a lot of money training people
Yeah,
to do things that they should have learned in school.
I get it.
Right.
Listen, we could have 17 episodes of our points of view on school, clearly.
Now, I'm positive about it because I think there is a will in this country, and as long as we don't destroy the culture of people wanting to succeed and live the American dream and work, this will be somewhat
We're
self-correcting.
back to not getting political. We won't destroy. That's the DNA of this place. Like, this ebbs and flows, but the DNA of this place. Now, look, every empire falls for a reason. Too much success.
Well, there's a lot of competition
Yeah.
in the world, so I think if anything, we'll have to respond to that.
Yeah, the
Right.
kid growing up in China as an only child in a lower class family is way more hungry than you. And that's going to play out.
It will.
It sure will. I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.